the cold steel of a suppressed Beretta pressed hard against her spine. The alleyway air tasted of sharp rain, copper, and inevitable death. Then a voice as smooth and dark as aged bourbon brushed against her ear. "You're mine now," he whispered. In a single heartbeat, her ordinary life shattered forever. Audrey Hayes was not a woman who courted danger. At 28, her world was defined by the scent of turpentine, the delicate flakes of gold leaf, and the quiet, meticulous preservation of history. As an independent architectural restorer in Manhattan, her nights were usually spent on scaffolding, breathing life back into forgotten Gilded Age ceilings. It was 2:15 a.m. on a storm-swept Tuesday when her life fractured. Audrey was working late inside the abandoned Van der Rohe estate on East 74th Street. The property had been bought by an anonymous shell corporation, and she had been contracted at an exorbitant rate to restore a 1920s fresco in the Grand Library before the demolition crews arrived to gut the rest of the building. The house was supposed to be completely empty. The heavy rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling stained glass windows masked the sound of the heavy oak doors opening downstairs. It wasn't until she heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of a body being thrown against a mahogany desk that Audrey froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she peered over the edge of the aluminum scaffolding, 40 feet above the library floor. The shadows below were thick, but the flashes of lightning illuminated 3 figures. 2 were massive, wearing tailored charcoal suits that screamed custom Italian wool. The third man was on his knees, his face bloodied and bruised. Audrey clamped a hand over her mouth. She recognized the man on his knees. It was William Bradley, a prominent New York State senator who had been dominating the evening news cycle regarding a controversial waterfront zoning permit. "You promised me an extension," Bradley sobbed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I have the zoning board in my pocket. I just need 48 hours. The man standing over him didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. When he spoke, the quiet authority in his tone was far more terrifying than a shout. 48 hours is a lifetime in our business, William, the man said. He stepped fully into a patch of moonlight spilling from the window. Audrey felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. It was Damien Russo. Even someone as disconnected from the criminal underworld as Audrey knew the name. The Russo family controlled the ports, the unions, and, allegedly, half the politicians in the tri-state area. Damien was the heir apparent, a ghost who rarely made the papers, yet whose reputation for cold, calculated brutality was legendary. He was breathtakingly handsome in a severe, aristocratic way, with high cheekbones and eyes as dark as obsidian, but his presence radiated pure, unadulterated violence. "I have the ledger," Bradley pleaded, spit flying from his lips. "The offshore accounts, the dummy corporations. I hid the flash drive right here in this room. Let me get it, and we're square." "You tried to sell me out to the Romano Syndicate," Damien said, adjusting the cuff of his crisp white shirt, the gold Patek Philippe on his wrist catching the dim light. "There is no square after that. Only a reckoning." Damien gave a barely perceptible nod to the massive man beside him. Thwip! The suppressed gunshot was terrifyingly quiet. Senator Bradley slumped forward onto the Persian rug, a dark pool rapidly expanding around his head. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward on the wooden planks of the scaffolding. Her elbow caught her metal tin of solvent. It tipped over the edge. Time seemed to slow down. The tin plummeted 40 feet, striking the marble hearth of the fireplace with a deafening crash that echoed like a bomb blast in the silent room. Damien Russo's head snapped up. His dark eyes locked onto the shadows near the ceiling. "Matteo," Damien murmured softly. Before Audrey could even scramble towards the service ladder, the heavy footfalls of the enforcer were already pounding up the iron spiral staircase. Panic consumed her. She sprinted across the planks, her boots slipping on the spilled solvent. But there was nowhere to run. The scaffolding ended at the far wall. A heavy, calloused hand clamped around her ankle, yanking her backward. Audrey screamed, kicking wildly. But Matteo hauled her up effortlessly, dragging her down the stairs and throwing her onto the library floor, mere feet from the senator's lifeless body. Audrey scrambled backward, her hands slick with a mixture of dust and her own nervous sweat, until her back hit a bookshelf. She looked up, trembling violently. Damien Russo walked slowly toward her. Up close, the sheer predatory grace of the man was suffocating. He crouched down in front of her, resting his forearms on his knees. He studied her face, his gaze stripping away every defense she had. He noted her paint-splattered overalls, the terrified widening of her hazel eyes, the chaotic mess of her auburn hair. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low, melodic baritone. I'm the restorer," Audrey stammered, tears of sheer terror spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't see anything. I swear to God I didn't see anything. I was just leaving." Damien glanced at the fresh corpse on the rug, then back at Audrey. A slow, dark smile touched the corners of his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a terrible liar, little bird," he said softly. He reached out, his gloved hand tracing the line of her jaw. The leather was cold against her heated skin. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bullet, waiting for the end. Instead, Damien leaned in close. The smell of expensive cologne, rain, and the metallic tang of cordite filled her senses. "You're mine now," he whispered. He stood up, towering over her. "Matteo, clean this up. Bring the girl to the penthouse. She just became our most valuable asset." Audrey awoke to the smell of fresh espresso and the soft hum of central air conditioning. She gasped, bolting upright, her hands frantically checking her body for bullet holes. She was whole. She was alive. But she was no longer in the dusty, decaying Van der Rohe estate. She was sitting on a massive king-sized bed, wrapped in silk sheets, in a room that looked like a spread from Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of Central Park, bathed in the bright morning sunlight. She was in a billionaire's fortress in the sky. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Damien Russo stepped inside. He had shed the dark suit from the night before, now wearing tailored slacks and a black cashmere sweater that hugged the broad lines of his shoulders. He carried a silver tray with a single cup of espresso, which he placed on the nightstand. "Drink," he commanded softly. "You're in shock." Audrey pushed herself back against the tufted headboard, pulling the silk duvet up to her chin. "Why am I alive? You killed a state senator. You execute people who cross you. Why am I here?" Damien sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't look like a monster in the daylight, which made him all the more dangerous. "Because, Audrey Hayes, you hold the key to tearing the Romano Syndicate apart to the bone." Her eyes widened. "You know my name. I know everything about you," Damien replied smoothly. "Born in Chicago, moved to New York 5 years ago. No living parents, one ex-fiancé who cheated on you with your yoga instructor and an impeccable credit score. I also know that as of 6 a.m. this morning, your employer received a frantic email from your account stating your aunt in Paris had a massive stroke, and you've boarded a transatlantic flight for an indefinite leave of absence." Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. "You erased me. I protected you, Damien corrected, his eyes narrowing slightly. Senator Bradley told me he hid a flash drive in that library, a drive containing the offshore routing numbers for the Romano family's money laundering operations. What he didn't tell me was where. The police found his body in an alleyway in Hell's Kitchen 3 hours ago. The Vanda Roja estate is currently swarming with federal agents treating it as a secondary crime scene. He leaned closer, invading her space. You've been mapping every inch of that room for 3 weeks. You know its bones. You know its secrets. Tell me where a desperate politician would hide a drive. Audrey's mind raced. The hollow cavity behind the plasterwork of the eastern molding. She had found it 2 days ago, a strange gap in the 1920s masonry. She had even noted it in her sketchbook, the sketchbook she had dropped on the scaffolding. If I tell you, Audrey whispered, her voice shaking, what happens to me? Then I keep you alive, Damien stated matter-of-factly. But there's a complication. Victor Romano has rats in the NYPD. He knows Bradley was killed, and he knows a civilian witnessed it. His men are already tearing the city apart, looking for the restorer. If you walk out of this penthouse, you will be dead before you reach the subway. So I'm a prisoner. You're a guest, Damien said, standing up. And tonight, you are going to be my fiancée. Audrey stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Excuse me. I am a man who values his privacy, yet tonight is the annual Metropolitan Art Gala, Damien explained, pacing to the window and looking down at the city. The Romanos will be there. The feds will be watching. If I suddenly pull a terrified, unknown woman into my secure compound, it raises questions. If I debut the woman who has captured my cold, dead heart, I legitimize your presence. You become untouchable to the street-level thugs, and it gives me an excuse to have my best men surrounding you 24/7. I don't know how to act like a mafia boss's girlfriend, Audrey argued, panic rising in her chest. I wear overalls. I eat cold takeout over a sink. Damien turned back to her. A flicker of something dangerously close to amusement danced in his dark eyes. You will wear what I buy you. You will smile when I look at you. And if Victor Romano approaches us tonight, you will act as though you are hopelessly, desperately in love with me. Do you understand? He didn't wait for her to answer. He crossed the room, pulling open the doors to a massive walk-in closet. Hanging in the center, wrapped in garment bags, were 6 couture gowns. The gala starts at 8, Damien said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. A glam squad will be here in an hour. Welcome to the family, Audrey. As the door clicked shut behind him, Audrey was left in the suffocating silence of the penthouse. She was trapped in a gilded cage, tethered to the most dangerous man in New York City. And as she looked at the dazzling skyline outside, she realized the terrifying truth. The only way to survive the war between 2 mafia empires was to play her part perfectly. She had to make Damien Russo, a man devoid of mercy, believe she belonged at his side. And she had to hope she wouldn't lose her soul or her life in the process. The transformation of Audrey Hayes took exactly 4 grueling hours. When she finally stood and stared into the gilded, floor-to-length mirror of the penthouse's cavernous master suite, the woman staring back at her was an utter stranger. The elite squad of makeup artists and stylists Damien had summoned had ruthlessly sharpened her soft, approachable features into something fierce, predatory, and entirely untouchable. She wore a backless, blood-red Alexander McQueen gown that draped over her curves like liquid fire, pooling elegantly at her feet. Around her throat, sat a vintage Cartier diamond choker that felt uncomfortably heavy, a beautiful glittering collar reminding her of her absolute captivity. Damien entered the room without knocking, his presence instantly sucking the oxygen from the massive space. He had traded his earlier casual attire for a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad, imposing shoulders with lethal perfection. The crisp white shirt and stark black bow tie contrasted sharply with his dark, meticulously styled hair and hard jawline. For a long, agonizing moment, he simply stood near the heavy mahogany door and stared at her, his obsidian eyes completely unreadable. "You look the part," he finally said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. He walked toward her, extending a strong, calloused hand. "Remember the narrative we discussed? We met 3 months ago at an exclusive gallery opening in Soho. I was captivated by your intellect and your eye for detail. You were charmed by my persistence. Tonight, in front of the cameras and the syndicates, you are the absolute center of my universe. You do not leave my side. You do not speak to anyone unless I introduce you. Do you understand?" "I understand," Audrey whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She forced herself to place her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and undeniably possessive. The ride to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Damien's armored black Maybach was suffocatingly silent. Heavy rain streaked the bulletproof tinted glass, blurring the neon lights and towering skyscrapers of Fifth Avenue into streaks of abstract color. As the luxury vehicle pulled up to the red carpet outside the iconic museum steps, a sea of flashbulbs erupted like a violent war zone. Damien's hand slid to the small of her back. The intense heat of his palm, radiating through the thin silk of her gown, felt like a brand, marking her as his territory. "Smile, little bird," he murmured softly against her temple, leaning in to create a perfect, picture-ready imitation of a devoted lover, whispering sweet nothings. "Show all of New York that you belong to me." Audrey forced the corners of her mouth up into a dazzling, fabricated smile. She stepped out of the vehicle into the blinding, chaotic storm of photographers and screaming reporters. They shouted Damien's name, shocked by the sudden, highly unusual public appearance of the elusive Russo family heir. And they were even more frantic to identify the stunning, mysterious woman on his arm. Inside, the legendary Temple of Dendur had been transformed into a sprawling, opulent gala. Waiters in immaculate white coats circulated through the crowd, balancing silver trays laden with flutes of Dom Perignon. The city's absolute elite, billionaire hedge fund managers, tech moguls, corrupted judges, and socialites, mingled in the imposing shadows of the ancient Egyptian stone structure. For the first hour, Damien played his role flawlessly. He introduced Audrey to mayors and magnates, his hand constantly resting on her waist or the curve of her spine. His gaze, whenever it landed on her, was filled with a manufactured, overwhelming warmth that terrified her with its sheer authenticity. She played along desperately, laughing softly at the right moments, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence while her heart hammered a frantic, exhausting rhythm against her ribcage. Then the ambient temperature in the grand room seemed to plummet. Approaching them through the parting crowd was Victor Romano. The rival Mafia Boss was a frail-looking man in his late 60s, leaning heavily on a custom silver-tipped cane, but his eyes were like dead, flat coins devoid of any human empathy. Flanked by two massive men who looked less like traditional bodyguards and more like seasoned executioners, Romano exuded a rotting, ancient malice that made Audrey's stomach turn. "Damien," Victor rasped, his voice sounding like dry, brittle leaves scraping across wet pavement. What a rare, unexpected pleasure to see you in the light. And who is this breathtaking creature you've brought into our world? Damien's grip on Audrey's waist tightened just a fraction of an inch, the only physical sign of the immense tension coiling within his muscles. Victor, this is my fiancée, Audrey. Audrey, this is Victor Romano, an old family acquaintance. Fiancé? Victor's thin, pale lips stretched into a grotesque, knowing smile. He reached out and took Audrey's hand, kissing the empty air just an inch above her knuckles. His skin was ice-cold and papery. You kept her incredibly well hidden, Damien. A skilled restorer of antiquities, I hear. Audrey's blood ran entirely cold. Panic seized her throat. How did he know that? The careful cover story Damien had crafted stated she was a wealthy art curator, not a restorer. Word travels astonishingly fast in New York City, Damien replied smoothly, his tone conversational, but his body shifting slightly to place himself between Audrey and Victor. Enjoy the vintage champagne, Victor. We have many other guests to greet this evening. Before you walk away, Victor said smoothly, his dead eyes locking directly onto Audrey's terrified face. Such a terrible shame about the Van der Rohe estate, isn't it? A beautiful, tragic piece of architectural history. My associates in the police department tell me the federal agents finished their preliminary sweep of the crime scene this afternoon. They left it completely unguarded. I actually sent a private demolition crew over there about an hour ago to begin taking down the Grand Library. You know, just to speed up the city's tedious zoning paperwork. Audrey's breath violently hitched in her throat. The library? Victor smiled, resembling a starving predator finally showing its teeth. Have a lovely, memorable evening, you two. As Victor and his enforcers walked away into the sea of silk and diamonds, Audrey turned frantically to Damien, her carefully maintained facade of calm entirely shattering. She grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo, pulling him roughly toward a secluded, dimly lit alcove behind a massive granite sphinx. "Damien," she whispered, raw panic clawing fiercely at her throat. "My leather sketchbook. I dropped it on the scaffolding last night when your men were chasing me in the dark. I drew the exact precise location of the hidden masonry cavity in the eastern molding where Senator Bradley hid the flash drive. If Victor Romano's demolition men find that book..." Damien's expression instantly hardened into a terrifying mask of pure, lethal calculation. The charming socialite vanished. The ruthless Mafia Boss returned. He brought his wrist up to his mouth. "Matteo," Damien spoke into his hidden cufflink microphone, his voice dripping with deadly authority. "Bring the car around to the kitchen service exit, right now." He looked down at Audrey, his dark eyes blazing with sudden, dangerous adrenaline. He grabbed her bare shoulders. "Can you find that exact cavity in the pitch dark?" "Yes," she breathed, nodding frantically. "Then let's go," Damien commanded, his grip iron-clad. "We're going to steal back the keys to this entire city." The armored Maybach tore viciously through the wet streets of the Upper East Side. Matteo drove with terrifying precision, blowing past red traffic lights. Inside the spacious back seat, the atmosphere felt suffocating and tense. Damien pulled a sleek black pistol from a hidden compartment under the leather seat. He racked the slide with a sharp metallic clack that made Audrey flinch. He then reached back inside the compartment and produced a smaller silver compact firearm. He held it out to Audrey, his expression completely unreadable. She stared at the weapon as if it were a highly dangerous venomous snake now. She shook her head rapidly, refusing to take the heavy metal object. "I do not know how to shoot that," she whispered with fear. "You point it at their chest and pull the trigger," he commanded. "Do not hesitate at all. If Romano finds that sketchbook, we lose." Audrey took the weapon with completely trembling fingers, gripping it tightly. They arrived at the dark estate, where the iron gates were broken. 2 black tactical vehicles were parked on the overgrown grass outside. Their bright headlights cut fiercely through the heavy and relentless pouring rain. Damien ordered his extremely capable men, "Secure the outside perimeter right now. Nobody leaves this property alive." He turned to Audrey, his intense gaze burning directly into hers. "You stay directly behind me," he ordered with absolute strict authority. "Do not stop moving until we are safely inside that grand library. If shooting starts, you get down to the hard floor immediately." She nodded silently, her racing heart threatening to crack her ribs. They slipped quietly through the side wooden servant entrance door together. The abandoned mansion was pitch black inside and smelled terribly damp. Distant shouts and heavy sledgehammers echoed ominously from the floor upstairs. Romano had sent men to systematically destroy the beautiful grand room. Damien moved with an unnatural predatory silence through the dark foyer. His lethal weapon was raised and ready for any sudden violent attack. Audrey trailed him very closely, her bare feet completely silent everywhere. She had abandoned her expensive, uncomfortable high heels in the car. Her vibrant red dress trailed behind her, like slick, wet blood. They quickly reached the intricately carved base of the grand staircase. Suddenly, a massive dark shadow stepped out from the adjacent drawing room. The bright muzzle flash illuminated the dusty hallway very briefly. A deafening roar of a shotgun echoed loudly through the house. Ancient wood splintered violently, just an inch from her pale face. Damien did not even flinch at the sudden, loud, explosive noise. He fluidly raised his weapon and returned fire twice with precision. The suppressed shots were eerily quiet and brutally clinical as well. The massive shadow crumpled heavily to the floor with immense force. "Move right now," Damien growled, grabbing her hand with a tight grip. He pulled her forcefully up the winding stairs without ever pausing. They reached the heavy, imposing oak doors of the dark library. From inside, the violent sound of tearing plaster was very unmistakable. Damien did not hesitate at all before making his aggressive move. He kicked the heavy doors completely open, splintering the old lock. There were 4 heavily armed men standing inside the ruined room. One of them had her familiar leather sketchbook grasped tightly now. He pointed a bright flashlight toward the ornate eastern wall molding. Another man was balanced precariously on the tall aluminum metal scaffolding. He swung a heavy steel crowbar into the delicate historical plaster. He smashed violently into the molding she had painstakingly restored for weeks. The ensuing violence was a terrifying and completely chaotic fast blur. Damien shot the man holding the sketchbook instantly and very accurately. A single bullet found its mark directly between his angry eyes. The remaining 3 men immediately drew weapons and returned heavy fire. Damien violently shoved Audrey to the ground behind a mahogany desk. He returned heavy fire with lethal and terrifying physical accuracy then. "The drive, Audrey! Go up there!" Damien shouted over loud gunfire. He provided heavy covering fire that pinned the remaining armed thugs. Audrey scrambled desperately on her bare hands and bruised very sore knees. The delicate silk of her expensive dress tore loudly right then. She reached the cold base of the tall iron ladder quickly. A stray bullet sparked brightly against the metal rung nearby her. Sheer blinding terror had pushed her into pure primal physical adrenaline. She climbed frantically up the tall structure without looking down once. She finally reached the dusty wooden planks of the high platform. The thug who had wielded the crowbar was completely dead now. He was slumped heavily over the metal safety railing up there. Audrey crawled very desperately past his bleeding and lifeless, heavy, limp body. Her hands became thickly smeared with warm blood and white dust. She desperately reached the damaged eastern molding on the old wall. She jammed her trembling fingers deep into the tight masonry gap. Her racing heart completely stopped when she felt the hidden object. It was finally there, hidden perfectly in the dark, cold space. Her bloodied fingers closed tightly around the small plastic exterior casing. It was the small, important drive containing the secret offshore accounts. "I have it right here!" she screamed loudly over the echoing gunfire. Suddenly, a massive, calloused hand grabbed her ankle very tightly indeed. The wounded thug yanked her backward across the dusty wooden planks. She dropped the precious drive. He aimed his gun at her. Time froze. A crisp gunshot rang out through the grand room. The man collapsed backward, plummeting 40 feet to the marble floor. Damien stood below, his chest heaving, his white shirt stained red. "Come down," he ordered. Audrey snatched the drive and scrambled down. She collapsed into his strong arms, completely safe and entirely his. "You are mine now," he whispered softly against her trembling lips. She closed her eyes, embracing her new, dark, dangerous life forever now. Did the dangerous world of Damien Russo and the shocking twists of Audrey's new life leave you breathless? If you loved this intense mafia romance drama, please do not forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers who crave high stakes and passion. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell today so you will never ever miss another thrilling story. Leave a comment below. What would you do next? Thank you.